Some people don't announce their pain. They carry it quietly, folded beneath their smiles, hidden behind routines, disguised as "I'm fine." They're the ones who show up, help others, and laugh at the right times, even when something inside them feels like it's slowly fading. Not because they want to be mysterious, not because they don't feel deeply, but because speaking their pain feels heavier than carrying it. They know that once words leave their mouth, everything changes. The way people look at them, talk to them, maybe even pity them. And for someone who values strength, that can feel unbearable. There's a quiet kind of courage in them, the kind that endures without applause. But behind that silence is a story psychology understands deeply. Keeping one's problems to oneself isn't just a personality quirk. It's a psychological shield, a quiet defense mechanism built over years of emotional lessons, often learned the hard way. For some, silence is control. It's a way to manage chaos internally, to prevent feelings from spilling into the world where they might be judged or misunderstood. For others, it's survival, the result of growing up in environments where vulnerability wasn't safe. Psychologists call this emotional self-containment. It's the tendency to process distress inwardly rather than outwardly. And while it can make a person appear calm or independent, it often hides an inner storm that rarely finds expression. What's fascinating is that these individuals often appear emotionally intelligent. They listen well. They comfort others. They understand nuance. But when it comes to their own emotions, they freeze, deflect, or downplay. Why? Because at some point, they learn that being open about pain doesn't always lead to comfort. Sometimes it leads to disappointment. And so, instead of seeking understanding, they become their own therapist. They write it out, walk it off, or bury it beneath responsibilities. This is not weakness. It's adaptation. But like all adaptations, it comes at a cost. Let's look at one reason why people keep their problems to themselves. Early emotional conditioning. Imagine a child who grows up in a home where emotions are dismissed. When they cry, they're told to toughen up. When they speak, they're met with silence or irritation. Over time, they stop trying. Their young brain makes a quiet decision. If expressing pain gets me nowhere, I'll just keep it in. Psychologists describe this as learned emotional suppression. It's not about pride, it's about protection. The mind learns to contain what it fears will be invalidated. Fast forward to adulthood, and that same person now struggles to trust emotional spaces. They might have friends who genuinely care, but the instinct to withhold feels safer. Even when someone asks, "What's wrong?" they smile and say, "Nothing, I'm okay." In their mind, speaking doesn't equal relief, it equals exposure. And exposure feels like weakness. Here's the paradox. People who suppress often care deeply. They just fear burdening others or disrupting peace. They value harmony over honesty, and peacekeeping becomes second nature. This is especially common among people with high empathy. Because they know what pain feels like, they refuse to pass it on. So they hold it quietly, believing they're doing the right thing. But there's another layer to this. Some people are what psychologists call internal processors. They don't find clarity through talking. They find it through thinking. Their mind is their safest space, their journal, their therapist. They analyze, reflect, replay moments, and eventually come to their own conclusions. To outsiders, this can look like emotional distance. But internally, they're anything but distant. They're deeply introspective. Still, even internal processors need connection. Because no matter how strong or self-aware someone is, the human nervous system is wired for co-regulation, the calming effect of being emotionally seen by another person. Without it, silence turns into isolation. And isolation, over time, turns into emotional fatigue. That quiet, invisible burnout that makes life feel heavier than it should. One more reason people stay silent is fear of misinterpretation. Many have experienced what psychologists call empathic failure. When you open up and the person you trust responds in a way that feels dismissive or self-centered. Maybe they try to fix you instead of listening. Maybe they tell you it's not a big deal. Or Maybe they simply change the subject. After moments like these, silence feels safer than misunderstanding. It's not that they don't want to be known, they just don't want to be mishandled. So they hide their pain behind a well-managed image. They become the strong one, the problem solver, the one who never complains. But even strength, when overused, becomes armor that traps the person wearing it. And beneath that armor, there's often a voice quietly whispering, "I wish someone could see I'm tired without me having to say it." So when someone keeps their problems to themselves, it's rarely indifference, it's experience. A mix of learned restraint, emotional depth, and self-protection. They build an inner world that few are invited into, not because they're cold, but because they've been burned before. They carry their feelings with dignity, sometimes too much of it. And maybe, just maybe, they hope that one day, someone will notice the weight they never talk about, not to fix it, not to question it, but simply to say, you don't have to carry it alone. There's another layer to the quiet ones, the ones who smile while carrying storms. Not all silence is born from fear. Some is born from discipline. For certain people, restraint becomes a principle, a quiet pride in holding themselves together when life feels like it's falling apart. They believe strength is found in composure, in maintaining grace under pressure. They've learned that dignity can be its own form of control. This kind of silence doesn't come from weakness. It comes from choice, a deliberate decision to rise above emotion, to be functional even when they're fractured inside. Psychologists call this emotional regulation through detachment. It's when people distance themselves from their feelings in order to keep moving forward. It's efficient, it's clean, but it also creates a subtle loneliness, the kind that grows between what they feel and what they allow themselves to show. Others stay silent because they struggle with emotional labeling. They can sense that something's wrong, tension in their chest, restlessness in their thoughts, but they can't quite translate it into words. And when you can't name a feeling, it becomes even harder to express it. So they stay quiet, not because they want to hide, but because they genuinely don't know how to explain what's happening inside. Their silence isn't secrecy. It's confusion wrapped in self-awareness. Then there are the healers, the ones everyone turns to. They listen to others, comfort others, and absorb emotions like a sponge. But when it's their turn to talk, they hesitate. Not out of arrogance, but because they fear disrupting the balance they've worked so hard to maintain. They think, if I break down, who will hold everyone else together? This mindset often emerges in caretakers, perfectionists, and highly responsible personalities. People who measure their worth by their usefulness. They equate vulnerability with burden. And so they become emotional vaults, collecting everyone's pain except their own. Yet deep down, the silence isn't just about protecting others. It's also about protecting themselves from seeing how much they've held in. Because once they open that door, they fear the flood might never stop. And that's the hidden truth. People who keep their problems to themselves often live between two fears. The fear of being misunderstood and the fear of truly facing what's inside. But beneath all that restraint lies something profoundly human. The desire to be understood without having to explain. To be seen in the quiet moments, when the mask slips just enough for someone to notice the exhaustion behind the smile. Silence, in this context, is not emptiness. It's a language, a way of saying, I'm trying to handle this on my own, but please don't mistake my quiet for indifference. Psychologists talk about emotional congruence, when your outer expression matches your inner state. For people who keep their problems to themselves, this congruence is often fractured. Their exterior shows calmness, but their inner world hums with noise. And that dissonance, that mismatch between the face and the feeling, creates emotional tension that's hard to sustain over time. Yet, there's a strange beauty in their silence too. It teaches endurance, reflection, and depth. It gives birth to wisdom, the kind that can only come from watching life quietly, from observing more than you speak. Many poets, thinkers, and philosophers live this way, internalizing, analyzing, transforming pain into perspective. Because when you carry things quietly, you begin to understand the subtle layers of emotion, not just your own, but everyone's. That's the paradox. The same silence that isolates also enlightens. It can turn pain into insight, solitude into self-awareness. But it can only do so when it's paired with compassion, not just for others, but for oneself. If you ever kept your pain to yourself, maybe it wasn't because you were cold or distant. Maybe it was because your silence was your way of healing, a temporary sanctuary until you were ready to speak. And when that moment comes, when you finally let someone in, it's not weakness. It's trust, hard-earned and deeply sacred. Because people who rarely open up don't do so lightly. When they do, it means they found a space where safety outweighs shame. So, perhaps the question isn't why people keep their problems to themselves, but what has their silence been trying to protect? Maybe it's their dignity. Maybe it's their peace. Or maybe it's a fragile part of themselves that still fears being broken again. If you recognize yourself in this, remember, your quiet doesn't make you hard to love. It just means you've learned to hold your own heart carefully. But even careful hearts need rest. Even strong minds need somewhere to fall. And if you recognize someone else in this, the friend who always says, "I'm fine," the one who listens but never talks, pause for a moment before you move on. Ask them again, softly, not what's wrong, but how are you really doing? Because sometimes the right tone can unlock a silence years in the making. Our world doesn't need more noise. It needs gentler listeners. It needs people who understand that strength and vulnerability are not opposites. They coexist in the same heartbeat. So, which one are you? The silent one who carries too much, or the listener who helps others feel safe enough to speak? If this made you see people differently, if it reminded you of someone you care about, take a moment to share it, subscribe, or stay connected. Because every quiet person has a story. And sometimes all it takes is one gentle conversation to bring that story to light. Silence isn't the absence of emotion. It's the echo of everything that's never been said.